And welcome back to Washington Commanders Insider. Today we're talking about some more key takeaways from last night's preseason loss against the Cincinnati Bengals. And so before we go ahead and we jump into it, I first want to remind you to hit that subscribe button, just like Jaden Daniels is going to be hitting Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel, Zach Ertz, and many others for multiple touchdowns this upcoming season. And so in exchange for hitting that subscribe button, I'm going to give you nothing but daily content around the Washington Commanders. And so make sure that you hit that like, you hit that subscribe, and you join the Washington Commanders Insider family as we talk nothing but Washington Commanders football. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and let's jump into it as we're talking about some more key takeaways from last night. So I know we talked about this last night with the sacks, but I wanted to go back and revisit this and just talk about what this means because, if you didn't get a chance to see the show last night or see the game, the Commanders were able to get a couple sacks, which equaled out to 22 yards, which that was definitely a plus. But I liked how this team consistently applied pressure last night. So I thought it was good to see that this team was able to apply this type of pressure, because I think that this is one of the biggest question marks, or this was one of the biggest question marks for the defense coming into this year, was going to be just what was the pass rush going to look like, because this team had been linked to going out and getting a pass rusher in the NFL draft. It did not happen. And then we saw later on they bring in Von Miller. And then you see in this game, we see, a good vast majority of the starters play in this one, and they looked very good with the amount of pressure that they were able to apply on the Cincinnati Bengals. And so I know it's just a preseason game, but still, you just have got to love the type of step that the Washington Commanders defensively so far have taken just really throughout this training camp. And I think that this was a very big step forward in this preseason game. And so I think that that is point number one, is that the defense perhaps has gotten better, as far as going out and pass rushing. And I'm so encouraged with what I saw, because, I cannot wait until we actually see Von Miller out there with this group, which I think is going to take them up to another level. And so the next thing with this defense is just really, I think the versatility was on display. And so, in one of the sacks where Joe Burrow goes down, I believe Jacob Martin was back there. One sack that we had, which actually got a penalty, that was Dietrich Wise Jr. He was back there for the sack. And so it just looks like the additions for the Washington Commanders are going to pay off here. Now, I know it's preseason, but I think that they're definitely trending in the right direction. And so this is the first time that we got a chance to see Javon Kinlaw, again, Dietrich Wise, and these guys out there. And so I thought that they looked very good. And I just think that with the players that the Washington Commanders have just really brought in here on the defensive side of the ball, it's going to fit perfect with just the scheme that Joe Wood Jr. wants to run. And I do think that that is why you're going to see this defense have a much better year than what they had last year. I just think that the team, yes, they had personnel, but I'm not sure that they had the necessary personnel to run the defense the way that they wanted to. When you go back and you look at Dan Quinn and just where he came from with the Seahawks, and then also too with the work that he did with the Cowboys, and Joe Wood Jr. was with them there, I just think that they wanted to be a bit more aggressive, maybe didn't have necessarily the personnel to go ahead and turn the defense loose like they wanted to, but it looks like that they are definitely trending in the right direction. And I think it was a huge step forward by going out there and really just, fixing the secondary, because I do think that Trey, Amos, even though he didn't get a chance to play, I think he's going to be just fine back there. Marshawn Lattimore, I think that he came up, he was a bit physical last night. And so, just some good stuff from the defense that we just didn't talk about from yesterday. And so I think that that's a key step, for this team, is that the defense looks like that they've taken a step forward from last season. Let's see if they can continue to show what they did too with stopping the run. That's going to be super important. And so the next thing for the Washington Commanders, and just as far as the key takeaway from last night's loss here, was just the wide receivers. And I think that when you're talking about the wide receivers, we know what Deebo Samuel can do. Heck, we saw what he could do on the very first play, and we didn't even pass him the football. That was on an end around. But I think aside from just Deebo Samuel, and then also too Terry McLaurin, somebody else has got to step up. And so when you just look at what the numbers were last night, I still think that that is a bit concerning, for me. Now, I do like the fact that Jalen Lane was able to show some flashes here. I loved his 16-yard catch. That was nice to see. He had 3 receptions for 42 yards. 16 was his longest. And so I love that route where he sits down, comes back on the comeback there, shields off the defender. Very nice route run. You can see the speed. You see how he gets the leverage and everything else. So that was beautiful. But then, you see the 6 targets and only 3 catches here. And so I do know, one of those, that turned out to be an interception. And so whether it was a busted play or a messed up assignment, I don't know what it was, but it just was not, it wasn't good football, all right, because it ended up being into double coverage there. And so Jalen Lane didn't even get a chance for that, but that goes down as a target. So I do like the fact that he showed some more, pop in this one. I would have loved to see something from Luke McCaffrey, because I do think that this is a guy that a lot of people are really anticipating that he's going to show up. When you're looking at a guy like Ja'Cory Brooks, I think that he's shown some flashes really throughout camp. And he also showed, some very good flashes against the New England Patriots. And so I know, a lot of people are talking about, well, I think that there's only maybe one spot left to get or whatnot. I just think that even if it's one spot, I just think that the positioning really can change with just the wide receiver room, because yes, we know Noah Brown should be the third, best wide receiver, out there for the Washington Commanders. But look, he's been battling, some type of injury or something like that he's been dealing with since mandatory minicamp. They've obviously, kind of paced him along. And so we haven't seen him, out there as much. And so we know he can definitely get it done or whatnot. But, he's missed time in the past with injuries and things like that. And I just think that somebody is going to have to step up here, because I do think that wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 is going to be super important. And I feel like that even if you're in wide receiver 5 territory or wide receiver 5, 6, whatever, you still have a chance to help this football team out. Because like I said, if Noah Brown or somebody goes down, or if something happens to where, we get off to a slow start, especially since Terry McLaurin has missed some time, even though I don't expect for him to really miss a beat with Jaden Daniels and everything else. But just saying, if something does like that, or something like that does happen, then you are going to need players to step up. And I'm not sure that we saw that so far in preseason play. So that is something that definitely you want to circle here, is that the wide receiver play has got to get better, because we're under 3 weeks now until the season opener. And so I think that the next thing, as far as the key takeaway out of this for me, is going to be that this team has clearly moved on from Brian Robinson Jr. I think that when you look at just what Chris Rodriguez Jr. and then also too with what Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt was able to do, aka Bill, like they were able to get chunk plays. And I think that that's probably what Cliff Kingsbury and this offense is looking for. They're looking for, those runners that, yes, they can get the tough yards, but you have to have that ability to just get those huge plays from time to time, because we saw it in the opening drive, how huge that was. Because you see Chris Rodriguez Jr. break off that 40-yard run, and within 2 more plays, they score, right? And so that reminds me a little bit of what you see with the Kansas City Chiefs, especially when they're at their peak, the way that they're able to just take the football down the field and just score on you like that. And then if you have the ability to slow it down like that, it just makes your offense that much more unguardable. And so I think that this is just something that we saw in yesterday's game. I get it, it's preseason, but I think that these guys are hungry for an opportunity. And I thought it was interesting because, look, Austin Eckler didn't get any snaps. I know he's a veteran player, whatnot, and he is more of the pass catcher here. But, the move on from Brian Robinson Jr., and then you see those 2 players featured, maybe that is an indication of what the Washington Commanders are looking to do. But I do think that they are definitely pivoting on from Brian Robinson Jr. I think the question now is he going to be traded, or is it just going to be an outright release? And so we'll see what happens with that. And so the next thing that I think that was a key takeaway out of yesterday's game for me was just the cornerback play. I think that when you look at the corners for the Commanders, I think that this is where it gets a bit interesting too, because I think when you look at the top corners, right, it's fine there. But I think that once you get past those top corners for the Washington Commanders, I think that that's where it gets a little tricky. So like when you looked at what happened was it Bobby Price out there? He got scored on. I think that he had a tough one. I also think that Carlin Biggers as well had a tough one. And so, it just makes me think that, Jonathan Jones didn't get a chance to play. I think he had been out here, with maybe something going on with practice, or not practice, but with an injury or whatnot, out of practice. And so, if guys go down like a Jonathan Jones, like Marshawn Lattimore, who has dealt with the hamstring, we saw that you're going to need players behind them that are going to have to step up. And so I thought we saw some good stuff from Antonio Hamilton Sr. So I thought we saw some good stuff from him at times. I think that Carlin Biggers, he's getting the opportunity. Just has been rough, I think, over the first couple weeks here of preseason. So hopefully he gets a chance to kind of tighten some things up in this next one. And then Bobby Price, I know he's coming back from the concussion or whatnot. It was a rough one out there. So I just think that, some of these cornerbacks are going to really have to step up, because when we're talking about the defense in general, right, and just everything working together from a scheme standpoint, if you go back and you look at just the Seattle days and just going back to Dan Quinn and his experience there, those guys like to run a lot of situations where they put the corners on Allens. And so if you're going to put a corner on the Allen, you had better be able to hold on, because, you're trying to hold on enough to where the defensive line, or, if you have a blitz called, they're going to be able to get home, or it calls enough pressure to where you're going to get an opportunity to get a pick on, just a bad throw, player just kind of moving off the spot, talking about the quarterback just being under all kinds of pressure or whatnot. But the only way that you're able to take advantage of that is you got to be able to hold on the outside. And so this is why cornerback play is going to be very important for, this defense. And so this is something that we've saw some great flashes from the top corners, but I do think that that is something that you definitely want to take a look at as we move along here in preseason, is that someone else is going to need to step up, because injuries do occur. Matchups do occur that way, to where you might have to throw a player in a situation, to go out there and see if they can get something done, because maybe another guy hasn't been able to get it done. And so that's something that you have to think about when it is, filling out your football team, and possibly having guys that, yes, they're not starters, but they could be contributors in some way, shape, or form, because you could maybe need somebody out there as a third down specialist, or whatever the case may be. And so anyway, you guys let me know in the comments, what is your key takeaway again from yesterday's loss against the Cincinnati Bengals? Because look, I know it's a loss. I get it, 31 to 17. Nobody wants to lose at any point of the season, but I do think that this team did take a step forward, especially defensively. I thought that we saw some great things and just really some good signs perhaps to come during the season. And then offensively, just going back to that running back room, look, man, it looks like that these guys are ready to rock and roll. And I think that you're going to see a unit that they're going to try to get more chunk plays. I think that this is a team that's just not going to try to go 3 yards and a cloud of dust here. I think that these guys are going to try to open it up and just shed tackles and get these big chunk plays, which again is going to make our offense a little bit more faster getting down the field. And then also too, this team already has the experience with the tempo, so they can slow some things down. And so you just add another dimension here with this running game. Clearly, it looks like that they moved on from Brian Robinson Jr. And then next, just talking about these wide receivers, somebody's going to have to step up. Aside from just the main wide receivers, I think that there is going to be, an opportunity or space, for one of these guys to step in, because you just never know what's going to happen from an injury standpoint. You don't know just, from a chemistry standpoint, how things would shape out, even though we know that Terry McLaurin is more than likely going to be ready to go. But still, if these guys get off to a slow start, you might have to go with guys that have been working with Jaden Daniels throughout the camp and stuff like that. So getting that trust and knowing what these guys can do, the sooner you get that out the way, the better off I think that this offense feels there with that group. And then lastly, just talking about these corners, it's something to where you're going to have to try to find out what you have, just behind your top tier corners and things like that. Like I said, it was a rough night, for these guys. And so they do have a chance to really tighten some things up. You got some more practice time, and then you got that last preseason game here. And so we'll see what happens. But as we always say, look, go Commanders, and I will see you guys on the next one. All right, peace.